you acknowledge that there have been a couple other attempts at modeling the value of ecosystem services here in the Minus model, which is something that Bob started with the Aries framework. You know, if you were to come and introduce this third idea of how to model these, do you think it would be valuable to keep on with those three separate attempts, or would there be value in saying, okay guys, let's just get together and pool our resources and just take one crack at this?
Yeah, the latter for sure. Well, okay, the latter almost for sure. I think that they're actually, I've got no interest in competing one tool against the other, but I do think at the early stages of anything, like the proliferation of approaches is really instructive. And I don't know how long to be okay with that phase of sort of multiple approaches and all the learning that goes on before there's some sort of consolidation. But I think there should be eventually some sort of consolidation where we spend less energy on duplicate things and piece it all together. I don't think that's too far off, a year or two, and I think Goenda's in this fantastic position to be the group that does it. I know that from the natural capital project side, no one's interested in competition among these tools. We're just busy trying to see if ours works and get some work done with things. And I think Aries and Mimes have been similarly focused on just sort of seeing whether these ideas pan out. But I don't think it's very long before we should really work hard on seeing what the best bits of each are. I think the uncertainty treatment and the interface of Aries is really, really impressive. I think the sort of links among ecosystem services are really strong in Mimes, like it's this very integrative model from the beginning, and then you sort of distill out ecosystem service outcomes. I think the modularity of Invest is one of its big strengths because you can start out really fast. If you don't care about these things, you don't have to worry about them while you study the things you do, but we're weak on these interactions. So, you know, that's just a thumbnail of how they differ, and nothing in there says that strengths can't be combined, right? Potentially kind of a nice division of strengths. So there's a long answer to say that I'm not worried about the fact that there are three efforts for a while longer. I think we'll all learn from there being diverse experiences and emphases, but I don't think it'll be long before we should stop that and try to learn and consolidate, and Gun would be a perfect place. Yeah, Josh.
Excuse me. You know, one of my issues with valuation is typically we do a study, we assess some value, and then that sticks as a value for quite a long time. And, you know, given what's happening in our ecosystems and our services, to me it'd be like, using those old values would be like, you know, deciding how much to pay for a computer based on studies over the past 10 years of values of computers around the world.
Right.
So I'm just curious what you're doing in natural capital to come up with a dynamic assessment of ecosystem values, to really account for the growing scarcity, and if you're doing anything like that, can you talk about that?
So I guess it's a fantastic question, and the premise is totally right. I guess one thing that we're doing is not trying to come up with aggregate global or regional values of ecosystem services, but trying to quantify the economic or health or whatever consequences of change. And so that, to me, escapes a little bit pegging a per hectare value that you sort of are saddled with until you do all the study again. So we're just trying to focus on change, and that, to me, is a really informative piece of dynamic. Is actually it's focusing on consequences of change. So, in part, we kind of dodge having to do it dynamically because we kind of won't do it anyway. How more broadly we as a community try to get away from values that stick. I think the way to do that is to really focus on these production function approaches that try to really link the elements of an ecosystem that are inputs to that benefit to the value of the benefit itself. And then you're not stuck with a spot estimate that you can do or set at some point.
I guess kind of a continuation of that question is I often think of these, you know, the value of something is if, for example, if you're starving, you're not getting enough food,
Yeah.
and you know you're not going to be getting enough food. What's the marginal value of food? Will keep you going a little longer? And I kind of look at ecosystems the same thing. You know, we don't have enough probably to maintain the functions we need over the long term.
Yeah.
So is marginal valuation the appropriate tool when we're below that potentially below that absolute minimum that's needed?
Yeah, it really varies on sort of whose mind you're trying to change and what policy you're trying to influence. So the big sort of global debate about, you know, how much destruction for the sake of agriculture is enough is one thing, but there are a lot of people at much more concrete scales just trying to decide whether to okay a road or not. And for them, they really want to ask the marginal value question. And I think there's value in informing them, even if they're kind of asking a narrower question than the biggest one could possibly be. So I guess that's my kind of response to that.
Here at the Institute, some of the things that we've done with the local legislature, for example, is try to create some sort of consciousness around common assets, such as a groundwater bill that we've been trying to move through. And I think that in the Institute, we are hungry to work not just within natural capital and its metrics, such as ecosystem services, but also within the context of social, human, and built capital to have some sort of like a stop point where we say, okay, we've done enough with ecosystem services and with modeling, and how are we going to bring this into the conversation under the dome, whether it's at the State House or in the Asamblea in Costa Rica or wherever.
Right.
And I'm curious to see what your vision is in terms of building that feedback into decision making.
So in the context of the Natural Capital Project, that I think is the beauty of having these two NGOs, these two globally networked NGOs as part of it. So, I mean, it's a research talk, right? So I'm emphasizing the research products. But each of these was motivated by somebody whose life is about, whose professional life is about interfacing with those legislatures wherever they are, or affecting policy wherever they are. And we do the science sort of in service of that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is each of these has people who live in that country, have lived there their whole lives, who are deciding that information on mapped ecosystem services will help me do this. So one example, just quickly from Sumatra, is the governors of Sumatra have all agreed to zone the entire island jointly for conservation, restoration, or development. And they want to do that based on biodiversity and two ecosystem services, carbon storage and water supply and purification, which might be three, I guess. And they've asked WWF to help them know where these services are and where they're important. And WWF has turned to the Natural Capital Project, which is one of its things, and said, help us do that. So now we have this whole thing, just like in Tanzania for Sumatra. I could have shown you that place too. And but it's up to that field team that came to us initially to work that out. So that's the NatCap answer, is that we're this kind of science that works at the middle. We're not presuming to know what would be policy effective in Sumatra. I think you're asking also about Vermont, so the local case. I think you can't just punt that when you think about a gun in Vermont. And it's one of the things that I think would be really interesting. I don't really have a concrete answer about what I do in the state of Vermont, because I don't really live here now, but I think that'd be a really interesting part of being the gun institute at the University of Vermont, is not just to do the synthetic science, but to be this problem-oriented place that gets into the social capital and engagement with policymakers.
Like Gary, Josh, and I, we've worked directly with like Hinda Miller, a local senator here. With her, we developed specific legislation language with the aid of one of the scribes at the State House. And you know, we've done some sort of expert witness thing, but it's not a deliberate thing. It's more like an ad hoc thing. And I think that we should be ripe to move to a stage where we provide that kind of service, still under the umbrella of neutrality of academia. But there's something there that might be interesting.
So that last thing you said, I think, is going to be the issue. Is like how you walk that line between being sort of objective,
for that,
question,
in
answer,
Washington, keep us in mind and tell us how far we can go.
You guys have had this conversation, Yeah.
I'm asking to what extent you institutionalize or think you should institutionalize equity issues in these models.
So I think any use of these models has to be really eyes wide open about the equity issues, about if both the providers of ecosystem services, if we're talking about a payment, are those providers that could qualify for the payment actually the already rich, or is it going to be a kind of a progressive thing? We've debated a lot about sort of implementing a poverty module of the tool or something to sort of force that, and it's not something we can wrap our heads around how we'd actually, in an analytical way that's defensible and even ethical at all, sort of automate the study of poverty alongside these benefit flows. But it's clearly the goal of the Tanzania project I talked about to quantify who the winners and losers under these scenarios would be. So not just would carbon go up or down, but what segments of society are likely to benefit or not. And we have actually really good data in Tanzania about all kinds of different poverty indicators that we're going to sort of stratify those beneficiaries by to see whether proposed changes, again, be they this development pathway like the full one or a specific road, who the winners and losers are, stratified by poverty class and all sorts of other socioeconomic data. So the reason I answered both those ways is I wasn't sure what you meant by institutionalizing the study of poverty. We thought about making it kind of a function of the software tool and then decided against that. But all the places that we're involved in working, that's part of the analysis, is the distributional effects of these changes. Yeah?
The UN puts ecosystem services front and center in their development programs and development policies. And every country at the most recent meeting in Japan has agreed to develop a national biodiversity strategy and action plan. What kind of engagement would you see GUND having with the United Nations Development Program, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and other UN agencies, World Conservation Monitoring Center, that really need this data, but don't necessarily have it?
Yeah. So I think, you said it there in the end, I think that GUND could, especially if it sort of wrapped all these different approaches to quantifying ecosystem services under one roof, could really be kind of a stop of choice for the tools it takes to quantify these societal benefits of conserved nature and other benefits from nature. So I think that, and I'm aware of that whole UN process, and I'm aware of this sort of idea of going to get this information country by country for even for their poverty reduction strategies and things. I think GUND could be a fantastic place to come for these tools, especially if the three biggest ones are all in one place, at least partially.
Time for one more question.
I guess this is kind of a mechanical question. If you changed roles and came to UVM, how would that change these relationships? I mean, I don't want to fantasize too inaccurately here.
I guess I have two answers. One is the easier one, which is the WWF stuff. So, I want to spend my career at the interface between practical conservation and resource issues and research science, and I've been sitting on that side and reaching toward the middle, and a move like this would put me on the other side of that interface, and I'd be reaching just as aggressively back the other way. And one thing I think I could bring is connections with not only WWF, but all the major NGOs and their field programs that we work with now, all of which are desperate for universities to help them. And most faculty I run into don't really know how to start. And so one of the things I'd like to do is be one of those faculties that knows exactly how to start and be very clear in connecting students to the problems and the funding and the satisfying applications that they work in all these places. So that wouldn't be really easy to do, I think, just because of all the relationships with donors and field programs and headquarters staff. I don't know. The natural capital problem thing, the natural capital project thing, would be messier, and I'm not really sure what the answer to that is. It's already this huge, messy thing that has 4 named partners, but 11 universities chipping in with their time. So, whether NatCap added a partner or I just stayed involved in it from here. Sorry, NatCap is short for Natural Capital Project. I don't know. I have no doubt, though, that I would stay involved in it and be still one of the co-founders of it and a big voice in how it's run. Several of those people are still part of that project, even though they're not in those 4 places. So institutionally, we'd have to think it over if it got that far. But in terms of access and intellectual give and take, I don't see it